Chair, we are buffering and we are ready to go.
Have we got a full complement today? I'm not counting 16. Who are we missing? I see no Director Martman at this point, which is kind of expected.
Chair, we are now live.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, July 12th. Just before we get underway, I can't see the gallery today, and we're kind of in an unusual circumstance in that I'm remote, and I would normally ask my Vice Chair, Director Martman, to assume the reins, but he happens to be off in Germany at this point, so is unable to attend. Made arrangements in the event that we have technical difficulties or you're just not liking having your chair remotely. Stone can step in my absence, and but hopefully it'll go smoothly. We don't have an incredibly arduous agenda today. Just like to remind everyone to make sure that your electronic devices are on mute or vibrate or something like that, and would begin by saying that when I call up my tech to help me, that we respectfully acknowledge that the Cowichan Valley Regional District is within the unceded territory of the Quw'utsun, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Stuminas, Liaxin, Pakwachin, Ditidat, and Pachidat nations. We appreciate their stewardship of the land for millennia. Looking around the room, I'm going to trust Ms. Boyd to keep us on track and keep the counts for votes, and look to the committee and for I'll turn it over to Ms. Boyd. What are we going to do first? Approve the agenda?
Thank you, Chair. We'd like approval of the agenda that the July 12th, 2023 Committee of the Whole agenda be approved as amended to include the late item R3 report from the General Manager, Land Use Department regarding the land management system budget.
Do we have a mover? Seconder? Any discussion on the agenda? Any late items other than what's mentioned? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Boyd, number 2.
Thank you, Chair. We have the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of June 28th, 2023, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of June 28th, 2023 be adopted.
Moved. Seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Any business arising?
No business arising from the minutes. We move to number 4, public input period. The purpose of the public input period is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy provides the public input period to proceed in a timely fashion. Therefore, there's 15 minutes set aside with 3 minutes available to each speaker.
Do we have anybody in the gallery today that would like to provide input to the committee today?
Yes, we do. We have, please state your name and your area and proceed. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This seems funny talking to an empty chair.
Do we have a camera on the lectern?
We'll get there. On this morning's agenda is a delegation by David Slade.
Go ahead, keep going, Cliff. I'm just going to turn the video on so that he can see you. There you go.
Oh, good.
You should be able to see Mr. Chair right there.
Oh, there. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Cliff.
David Slade has a delegation on Rails to Trails, and the Slade families are the experts on water around here. They've been around for years and years. In 1975, we had his dad, Ken, pound a well for us. They didn't even have a drilling machine then. It was just a pounder. And he took him about a week to go down 115 feet, but we got 2.5 gallons of water. And we still get 2.5 gallons of water a minute. And wells around us are 600 and 700 feet deep, and they don't get the water we do. So there's something to say about the old systems. What I'm getting at is the David Slade family really knows their water and really knows the environment, and they've been here for generations. So whatever David comes up with today, I'm sure it will involve the environment, looking after the environment, and the water. Right now, the plan for this board is to put in a trail beside the rail from Wharf Park to Mill Park, Old Mill Park. And this will damage the environment. There'll be trees taken down. There'll be soil dumped in the lake. And the Shawnigan Lake certainly doesn't need this, doesn't need the added pressure at this time. There's many culverts crossing.
Mr. Evans, I think you're meandering quite far off the topic of rail to trail and Mr. Slade's presentation, and I don't believe there's anything on the Shawnigan Rail to Trail project on this agenda. May I ask you to provide your input on agenda items?
Mr. Chair, I believe that Mr. Slade's talk is on the agenda, and trails are on the agenda. Rails to trails are on the agenda. So anyway, Shawnigan Lake is having a tremendous pressure put on it right now by the browning of the soil and soil dumping. So I hope that today this board will realize that we should really put the trails right on where the rails are. It'll save you a lot of money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else that would like to provide input to the committee today on items pertaining to the agenda?
We're not seeing any, Chair, at this time.
Thank you. Can we proceed to the next item?
Yes, we are at delegations number 5. David Slade, Friends of the Rail to Trails, Vancouver Island, regarding the federally funded feasibility study on the rail to trail conversion.
Welcome, David. It's been some time. Looking forward to your presentation today. Can't hear a word.
Thank you very much, everyone, for allowing me to present to you today. I know many of you at this board table. Some of you are neighbors, some of you are colleagues in past, current, and hopefully future endeavors of which I will try to be engaged. I have a tremendous amount of respect for all that you do for your communities and the responsibility that you have for charting a course towards what hopefully will be a prosperous and sustainable future for all of us and our families. As was pointed out to my surprise, I am a antiquated well driller, and he was describing antiquated well drilling methods. Our family well drilling firm, Drillwell Enterprises, has been passed on to its 3rd generation now. But it's actually not a bad segue into my conversation about antiquated rail lines. You've known enough about me, but let me just talk a little bit about who I'm here representing. I'm representing an organization called Friends of Rails to Trails Vancouver Island, or fortvi.ca is our website. There should have been live links that was sent out to you in our agenda package that went out. We are a total of 224 members. We are a nonprofit society. We have been in the business of trying to promote rail to trail conversion for a number of years. I am the vice chair of this organization, and we have got an online petition right now that has got 3,000 signatures on it supporting a rail to trail conversion of the ENN corridor. Now, the ENN corridor has got I think a long and varied history. It is probably the largest instrument of defranchisement of the First Nations on this coast of Vancouver Island. The ENN land grab basically stole all of the land that was at that time at least held partly by the Crown and made it into private land. And to add insult to injury, the tiny little postage stamp reservations that had been designated for the First Nations was chosen in many cases as the best route to run the railroad, and a 100-foot swath was further stolen from the reservations that went through where the rail went through. And it was all out of convenience, and it was to further promote the resource extraction and development and colonization. So we are very much in favor of return of the land through the reservations to First Nations, and whatever further reparations and restitution is deemed appropriate for the damage that was done to First Nations communities by the ENN land grant and by the installation of the railroad when it happened. So the corridor, the part that we're talking about from Langford to Courtenay and from Port Alberni to Parksville is 289 kilometers. It's got 236 level crossings, so that's where the railroad goes right across a public road. It is extremely curvy. It was built for antiquated movement of mostly raw materials, logs and ore, coal and things like that. And then later it was also for moving people, but it was only able to move people at very low speeds due to the nature of its construction. Almost a year ago, I made a presentation to the previous board about rail to trail conversion, but there's been a lot that's changed since that time. There is the Snana-Os decision for the Nanoose region that has returned the land that goes through the reservations to them. That same decision, it will be extrapolated to other reservations, including the Cowichan, the Halalt, the Semanis, where they will be getting the land back through their reservations if that's what they choose, which I believe that is the case, because some of them tried to be interveners in that court case. And there has been a feasibility study that we have done on the rail to trail conversion. It was funded by the Federal Active Transportation Fund. So for $35,000, we were able to fund a study that was a Class D study, which is very high level. Mostly it's tabletop stuff, looking at previous studies, looking at other rail to trail conversions in other jurisdictions. And what we learned from that is that you don't get very much for $35,000. But we also found that the estimate for changing this part of the corridor that we're talking about, Langford to Courtenay, Parksville to Port Alberni, would cost approximately $172 million. So that's $590,000 per kilometer. But this is a world-class trail we're talking about. We're talking about 13 feet wide, so 4 meters wide. We're talking about a quarter of it being paved. We're talking about raising the two trestles in South Cowichan so that they will be legal height for traffic to go underneath them. We're talking about a quarter of it being paved, all of the bridges being decked and railed, all of the crossings being upgraded to meet current standards for trails and intersections. And our summary, our study suggested that such a trail could bring as many as 860,000 person visits per year. Now this is extrapolating from other trails, the Gap Trail in Pennsylvania, the Galloping Goose in Victoria. That would suggest 160,000 commuters a year. So that's 160,000 people that would be making trips by a means which would otherwise be made in cars. So that's taking 160,000 cars potentially off the roads over the length of this corridor. It's talking about 700,000 recreational users. So those, of course, are people who are walking their dogs and riding their horses, but it's also talking about tourism. It's talking about bringing people to our communities. Can you imagine the tourism benefits of bringing an extra 1,000 people a day through Duncan, through Ladysmith, through Chemainus, people who have got time on their hands and money in their saddlebags? It would be a huge economic driver. And I'm going to pass out a slide, which you have an opportunity to had an opportunity to see previously, but I would like you to have the opportunity to follow up on it again. The Galloping Goose sees an average of 2,000 people a day on it, and that's over all of the check-in stations. There is one particular spot on the Goose right now that has already had over 600,000 person visits past the counting station on it. Victoria is the leader in Canada for active transportation. 15% of the people that commute in Victoria commute by bike or by foot. That is, at least in some significant part, due to the infrastructure that is there, provided by a large part the Galloping Goose. We have the opportunity to have that same thing in our communities. People talk about rail with trail, and there's places where that makes sense. But if you've got tunnels, if you've got bridges and trestles, if you've got rock cuts and ravines and big swamps, you can't put a trail beside that railroad tracks in meaningful terms. So it just won't happen. If we think about only rail with trail, we will never see a link that joins all of our communities. I'm going to go straight to my ask right now because I see I'm running out of time. So my ask is that the CVRD has received $600,000 for consultation on the ENN corridor from the province of BC. So I don't know whether that money is here yet, but it is available to all of the stakeholders along the corridor, First Nations and municipalities. I would like to propose that the CVRD work with all other recipients of these funds to commission a complete section-by-section cost-benefit analysis of the potential future uses of the corridor, including but not limited to end-to-end rail-to-trail conversion. The study should include outreach, engagement with all stakeholders and communities, First Nations, and settler. Such a study will use only a small portion of the $18 million that has been distributed to First Nations and regional districts along the corridor, but would be an essential element in any efforts to engage in meaningful consultation on the future of the ENN corridor. I mentioned the Active Transportation Fund. This is a $400 million fund that we got $35,000 for our study. There is up to $50 million per project available from that fund. $50 million, based on our estimates, would create a active transportation corridor, world-class, all the way from Langford to Nanaimo, all the way from Langford to Ladysmith. A very small portion of that $50 million would create, half of it about, would create a path all the way from South Shawnigan all the way to Ladysmith. So the complete length of our regional district could be done for $25 million. And that money is sitting there waiting. It doesn't have to cost our local taxpayers anything. The federal government is trying to get this money out the door. So I really encourage us to move with all possible haste, because nothing will happen if we don't get started on it. And I think that that's just about my time. I really hope that you've got some questions, and I would love to answer them, and I would love to be further engaged. I would love for us to be stakeholders in any future conversations. We already are stakeholders with the Malahat First Nation in their transportation study that they're doing, so we'd love to participate with anybody, groups or individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slade. Appreciate your presentation. I didn't have an eye on a clock to see whether or not you ran overtime or not, but your information was well received. I currently have Director Wilson, Stone, and Abbott on the list, and I would just let you know that it's our practice that we don't generally respond in the form of a resolution on delegation requests. So we all have the information. Thank you for sending it to us in advance. And I will go to Director Wilson with a question for you first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, David. That's it's all good information. Creating active transportation is something that I have no problem with at all. I think it's a great idea. The costs seem to be awfully expensive. Was it 590 kilometers per? Oh, sorry, $590,000 per kilometer. Is that the number you quoted there?
Yes, that is, and I agree, it is a high number, and it could be done much more cheaply than that. I would refer to the Cowichan Valley Trail that is 26 kilometers long. The entire trail was converted to a active transportation corridor for $800,000.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the kind of possibilities, but our consultant made the assumption that all of the ballast that's currently on the rail bed would have to be replaced with new ballast, which I think is a mistake. And it's also based on a quarter of it being paved, so that's through all of the sort of the dense urban areas being paved, which wouldn't necessarily be needed. And it's also making the trail much wider than the current rail bed is right now. The rail bed is about half as wide as what the proposed plan is.
Yeah, thank you. And follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Proceed.
And there's 860,000 person visits, of which 160,000 would be cars off the roads, local people using this. But that would mean that and you did mention tourism, and I've got a bit of a problem here with taking people off the roads to save the environment and then bringing perhaps 4 or 5 times as many in as tourists, which really does negate any kind of savings that we're made here. So great having a path, but if the idea is to bring in more tourists and create more chaos, if you like, if that's the word, and more environmental pollution through that, then I'm afraid I can't quite see the thingy there. So what's your thoughts on that particular aspect?
Yeah, there was actually a very interesting article on CBC this morning when I was coming into town, talked about the benefits to local communities of providing active transportation opportunities. So every chance to get a car off the road makes it easier for the people who still have to drive cars. And I share your concern about people coming here from great distances, but in the studies that have been done on other active transportation routes, the vast majority of users are users that come from less than 100 miles away. So they're people who would likely come here from other parts of British Columbia, from the close parts of the United States, and of course there'll be international travelers as well. But I don't suppose for a minute that having a world-class trail through our communities would cause more people to travel. It would cause people who are already prone to travel in our communities and spend their money in our communities.
Thank you. Interesting point of view. Thank you.
Director Stone.
Hey, David. So yeah, I had that written down in my notes too, because I knew Mike would bring it up, because when we talk about bringing tourists, but then we have this challenge of greenhouse gas emissions. If they drive to get here, the net benefit would be negated. But that being said, I appreciate that you say you don't get a lot for 35K. I think any of us in government know when you do studies, it's tough to get a lot for that amount of money. In your Class D estimate, which also for people in local government is a terrifying number, because usually it escalates as the class estimates go from C to B to A, and then you construct and you add another 30% to the Class A estimate. Was that including rail removal and all remediation of the corridor?
No, it was not. And I guess there is some, and perhaps even you could speak to this, Aaron, more than I could. There is some idea that the responsibility for that may actually fall to the current owner of the rails, which I believe would be Southern Rail. But in any event,
actually, that would be the local governments and First Nations you're presenting to.
Okay, all right. So the flip side of that is that the weight of the scrap steel, we estimate, would net more than $6 million, which would go a very long way towards the cost of the remediation. So, I do realize that is something that needs to be done. And I would point out that several of the other community trails, including the Okanagan Trail, which referenced in the handout, on the flip side of that handout, a lot of the work was done by local volunteers. We have some amazing groups in our community, the Cowichan the Trail Stewardship Society. We've got lots of hiking and cycling groups that I'm sure would love to be part of it. And it doesn't have to be made into a world-class trail all at once. It could be a section-by-section trail that could commute our communities, and it could be modest at its beginning. It does not have to be done. And I would suggest that the study that I propose that the CVRD engage with other communities and commission, and perhaps the Malahat Urban Systems is doing their transportation study right now, that we could identify areas that it makes a lot of sense to do this right now, and then other areas where it maybe doesn't make sense to do it for another 2 or 3 or 10 years from now.
Thanks. And so I'll try and get through my questions, Mr. Chair, if I can just have a follow-up.
Yeah, have a follow-up, or do you have a bunch more? I'm wondering whether I should.
No, I'll just
let
pick
you go
one
through. Okay.
of the many questions just for brevity, and hopefully our presenter can respond to the question, and then we'll get to others. I'll try and pick one here, and then I'll make my statement. So there's a lot of things here, and this isn't necessarily to be answered, but maintenance costs, who maintains the crossings, how do they function, who pays for those ongoing costs. The Galloping Goose is a commuter, I know because I have family that lives on it and uses it daily, skateboarding and biking to get to work and school. But the mass majority of that is because of the dense urban population as commuters. So making an equivalency in numbers would be inaccurate, I think, if you're looking at a region-to-region trail with a lot of space in between versus the Galloping Goose. And also comparison to alternatives. So, we made some statements about Rail Plus Trail. Any study would, of course, have to make those comparisons, because if you take the total cost already of $172 million, I'm not sure, and there might be ancillary costs like rail removal and remediation on top of that. We'd have to compare it to the alternatives. When you're getting into those kind of numbers and looking at what the CVRD has been able to do with a much slimmer budget per kilometer, I'm not sure you couldn't cantilever trestles and solve those other Rail Plus Trail issues that you cited for less money. So I think that would be important. And I think that for me, the clear message that we've heard is nothing should preempt the consultation with the local governments and First Nations. So I wouldn't be prepared to support any allocation of money to a process that would essentially usurp the engagement process that we're entering into. It's been delayed. I think the first meeting is next week. We've had our conversations about it. We have differing opinions on what the best and highest use is long term. But I've always said that, if rail is truly dead, that I want to see us preserve the corridor for future generations as best as possible. And I'm a big supporter of active transportation in general. So don't get me wrong, but I still think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I get that what you're saying is this in-depth study would answer those questions. I just think that that's a phase that comes later once we've actually come to the table with all the nations and local governments, found agreement that there's at least a mass, hopefully a consensus support for that sort of a vision, and then allocating the funds to look at that. As much as I'm also mindful of timing, I think my bias is that we don't rush engagement with the nations or the local governments, and we do things in what I would call a good way, which is let that process inform any next steps, and I'd be advocating for whatever the outcomes are from that work with the province and the nations. Thanks.
Just in response to that, I have to say that I'm highly disappointed that the provincial government didn't use some small portion of that $18 million to actually start this engagement and consultation process, instead of dropping it into 14 different laps and saying, do something with this. So I'm really disappointed that they've just kind of kicked the can down the road, but I'm really hoping that the kind of study that you're talking about and the kind of engagement that I think we all believe is absolutely necessary will come to pass eventually. And my hope would be sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mr. Slade. You can put your hand down, Aaron, if you don't have any further questions. And I'd just like to remind everyone, this is a delegation and questions for the delegation. We're not really debating an issue or resolution or the likes today. And we have been having our delegations getting very long and time consuming. So I'd just like to ask everyone to be brief. And,
Apologies, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Slade, your answers as well. I'll go to Director Abbott. I have no other names on my list before I would go back to Director Wilson for round two. So, Director Abbott, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I applaud Mr. Slade and his delegation. In deference to the Director Stone, I feel that engagement is laudable. It must happen, but it's the old use it or lose it. And at the present pace, I think we're leaning towards the losing it. I am participating as best I can as an active transportation participant, and I would love to see this happen, and in consultation with all parties. I love the fact that there's the efficacy of what you're suggesting of using the funds up and down the corridor. Every stakeholder group use the funds to come up with a solution that takes in all aspects. And finally, if there was a question or a comment, is it too premature to ask how you think First Nations will embrace this idea of trails and or rails through their lands?
Yeah, well, the First Nation, or the Malahat First Nation, was very interested in the notion that perhaps, even though the corridor doesn't go through their reservation, it goes through their territory. And the fact that they are building out tourist service infrastructure, and that people could possibly get off the trail at South Shawnigan and then come down and then get back on the trail at Shawnigan or Cobble Hill after stopping and spending some of their money at the Skywalk, for example, or other places. They thought that that was very, very important. And I know that you are an active transportation enthusiast. I see you taking your life in your hands repeatedly when you're cycling to and from Cowichan Bay to Shawnigan. And I used to, when I was working at Drillwell, I used to commute along the highway, and I considered every trip a near-death experience. Our cycling infrastructure is terrible in this community. And I have to say that in spite of the fact that people like yourself and myself are willing to risk our lives to cycle to and from places, there would be hundreds and hundreds of people who would be doing it every single day if we had the infrastructure that a rail-to-trail conversion would provide.
Thank you. Does that conclude your questions, Director Abbott?
Thank you, yes.
And Director Wilson, your hand has gone down.
Yeah, I took it down because I think you acknowledged that it was up, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of short questions.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a comment made earlier on, David, by Mr. Evans about his concerns about the trail alongside Shawnigan Lake there. Could you address these concerns, please?
Well, yes, there is no doubt that any rail, any trail beside rail is going to have a much greater environmental impact than a trail on the rail bed. Now, you could say that the remediation will be an environmental impact. Well, right now, those creosoted ties are sitting there rotting away and causing environmental damage anyways. It would be much, much cheaper. You're talking about the simplest rail to trail conversion possible. It would be along the same lines as the Cowichan Valley Trail, where there was no road crossings, there was no trestles that needed to be decked and railed. There's no, it would be, tear up the trails, tear up the rails, run a compactor and a grader along the corridor, and you would have a trail, and it would be a fraction of the cost of the proposed phase 3 rail with trail.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, Mr. Church.
Including
thank you for
questions,
the handout that you put here. And just reading through it there. And it says here 1 million visitors per year, tourists from all 50 states, 35 countries. And then on the back it says, while creating significant economic, health and greenhouse gas reduction opportunities in the interim. What supporting data do you have that it actually reduces greenhouse gas
What data do we have? I guess the fact that a significant number of road commuters in our community would be commuting by bike and by foot.
And that doesn't include the 1 million visitors per year, which is
Yeah.
going to go on the top
So,
there.
so I would suggest that this comparison here is a much better comparison than the Galloping Goose, because it goes through a very rural community. But you're right, I mean, I can't argue that there is going to be greenhouse gas emissions from people coming to our communities. But this is an opportunity for us to think global and act local, to get people active. It would improve people's health, it would improve people's safety, it would reduce.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see the problems with, as far as health benefits are concerned. I'd just like to see some data on the greenhouse gas reduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there is the full report, the economic impact report, which might have more details on the GAP website. So this is just one little excerpt from it. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And I, like I say, I look forward, we at Fort VI would love to be participants and stakeholders in any future discussions or negotiations. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mr. Slade, very much. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have no correspondence information. We move to number 8, reports. R1, report from the General Manager, Community Services Department, Regional Recreation Governance, Cowichan Lake Recreation Community Halls.
Mr. Elzinga, welcome.
Squale, good morning. Mr. Chair, presenting a report today. We anticipated that we would have the Regional Recreation Commission Establishment Bylaws coming forward today, but this one piece was hanging out there, so we now anticipate those bylaws coming forward on July the 26th. Fingers crossed. Congratulate the board on decisions on content around those commissions to date. And so this is a little outside the Regional Recreation Initiative, but again, it's something that's been hanging out there with looking for your direction on governance around community halls that are kind of left orphaned outside the Regional Recreation Initiative. So the report is in front of you. Here for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Elzinga. Before we get into questions, I've read this report a couple of times, and I've spoken with Mr. Elzinga in advance, and I don't know, just the fact that Cowichan Lake Recreation has 4 halls to deal with. Looking at the recommendations that have come forward, they are not quite meeting what I would expect for community participation and governance on the 4 community halls in that area. No, there's other halls to be considered. So one of the big questions that I had was around fiscal considerations around the how they're paid for and by what areas and the likes. I would like to recommend that we get some additional fiscal data to help us to inform the decisions. I think that the models that have been suggested at this point, and this is kind of awkward being remote, don't meet my expectations of what we would have in the way of governance for whether it be advisory or decision making. And I would like it if someone might consider referring this to staff to come back to our next committee of the whole meeting with some financial data that would inform us in our decision making and perhaps look at other options. I see a bunch of blank stares on my screen here. Director Stone.
I just had one simple question first. I know that in the town of Ladysmith, we're just retaining the existing committee structure we have, kind of removing FJCC from that body. Considering that there are a number of community halls in Cowichan Lake Recreation, why not just keep it the same? Minus the sports arena.
If I may, Mr. Chair, through to Director Stone. So as the committee is aware through some of the discussions that we've had around commission governance, we've been trying to address delegated authority and the use of elected officials for that delegated authority. So right now, the Cowichan Lake Recreation Commission is made up of 9 members, 3 elected from that area, 6 appointed community members. So it is in that situation where there is some delegated authority with 6 appointed community members, and that was something that staff did not recommend moving forward through this whole initiative. So that's the answer to the question. If you wanted to keep the existing commission for the community halls, that's certainly an option.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Have, in conversations with the commission, did they express a preference? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Like, and I get the staff perspective, but if the 3 communities like the existing system and wanted it to continue, I just was wondering if that might just be the easiest way to do it.
Mr. Elzinga, and I have a comment as well.
Sure. So through the chair to Director Stone. So staff could certainly support the existing commission providing governance for the community halls on the basis that the items considered by that body would be recommended to the Cowichan Lake Recreation Commission for decision and eventual forwarding onto the board.
And I would just suggest that it's a very different dynamic when you take the arena out of the equation, and that, you know, and I, because of not having the fiscal information available to me, we would be, I've got 2 community halls in my electoral area that are perhaps not as busy as the Centennial Hall in the town of Lake Cowichan and the community hall in Yubo. And I think that this just needs a little bit of a deeper dive. And I think it might be a little bit of an overkill to have a 9 member commission to oversee 4 community halls. So I think that there's definitely some merit in what Mr. Elzinga has recommended, but there may also be other more simpler, more discrete options that could be available. And I would like to look at the fiscal aspect of it before any decision is made. And I realized we were in a bit of a time pressure, and I thought, Mr. Elzinga, could you address that as well?
So, Mr. Chair, I don't think there's the time pressure, because I think we can move forward with this initiative independent to the Regional Recreation Commission establishment. Again, I still anticipate bringing forward those bylaws on July the 26th. I think on behalf of the Finance Division and myself, if you could provide a little bit more specifics into the fiscal analysis that you're looking for. Is that a 2023 budget figures for the community halls, for the arena, et cetera? Any indication of what additional financial analysis you'd be requiring would be appreciated.
Are you hoping that I could give that to you right now?
If you would like to follow up offline, that's acceptable to staff as well.
I would, and just to give the committee some example, you know, there's a very interesting dynamic as to the funding based on the assessment values, and at one point, Area F and I used to contribute about 40% each in the town of Lake Cowichan, 20% each. Area I's assessment values have increased substantially. Area F's has come down substantially due to the decrease in forest assessments, and I think the town of Lake Cowichan has been the same. So we might have a 45, 35, 20 mix, and it would be in one of the examples that was proposed that there would be 2 members of the town of Lake Cowichan versus 1 and 1, and you know, those numbers don't seem to jive when you compare to funding. Now it works population wise, but it doesn't work funding wise. If we could get a referral to staff, I would follow up with them and consult with directors Deck and the town of Lake Cowichan and for a more refined fiscal picture. Did I see a motion to refer? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion on the propriety of referral? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you very much.
you.
Ms. Boyd, R2. Thank you, Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Chair. R2, report from the Communications and Engagement Division regarding the communications and website reviews.
Good morning. Mic's on. I have Mr. Raimondo doing an upload. Yeah, there we go. For me to get my presentation online. But I can just start by saying thank you so much for having us today. We have two different reviews / reports that have been done for the Communications and Engagement Division since late last year. One of them is to look at how we communicate with the community, essentially. It's a look at our external communications and the processes that are involved to be able to do that. Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. So I'll quickly walk you through this. The purpose of this, though, was really to understand how are we doing as a division, and how do we get our word out to the community? How do we make sure that our internal stakeholders are feeling like they understand how we do that, to get us the right information to be able to put that out to the public, and really refine some of the processes that we have in place and make sure that we're doing the best that we can as a small team of 2 people. I'll actually take a moment to acknowledge my counterpart here, Leah Waldron, who's been with us for about 18 months, 20 months at this point, and has been integral to creating a even more robust communications and engagement function within the organization. So I just really want to give her the kudos that she deserves in terms of serving the organization in the way that we do, which, for the board's information, before I get into this, we really work in a decentralized way where we rely a lot on staff to help us to do what we do. And there's varying levels of how much input staff give us to accomplish the job that the organization needs. And it varies from different departments and different divisions have different capacities, and we always work with them to try to make sure that we're serving them in the best way possible. Some divisions have more communications needs than others. But again, it's a really evolving framework in terms of how we work. So we really wanted to make sure that we were doing what we can. And so as a part of this process, we had interviews with staff from 9 different divisions in the organization to help us to understand how we were serving them, whether we could do things better. And so let me just walk you really quickly through this. Let me take a step back. We had Urban Systems contracted to help us do an objective review of this. So we really were, I was very much hands-off in terms of this thing, and I wanted to make sure that it was coming objectively to the organization and giving us the best possible feedback we can without any direction from staff other than just in terms of what we wanted to know. So the project phases was a high-level review of what we currently do, interviews with 9 different divisions. We talked about process maps that were based on what staff had told us, and then a report of what we heard, which is the crux of this presentation today. So again, just for your high level, I won't spend too much time on this, but these are the different functions that we provide the organization as far as the communications and engagement team. It's kind of a large swath of things, and we spend different amounts of time doing various roles. Many tools that we utilize across the organization. As you can see, like social media plays a major part in terms of what we do. Our website obviously is very important, and we'll get more into that in the next report that I'll present. But we also have a number of microsites that have been reviewed as well, and which also help us to accomplish the goals that we have as a regional district. And then news and publication. Again, we do a lot of in-person engagement as an organization, been lessened in recent years versus when I first arrived in 2018, but these still play an important role in terms of what we do as an organization. When you see internal there, Hootsuite is a tool that we use as an organization to manage our social media. Again, going back to this slide, you'll see how many different channels that we communicate across. So it really helps us to provide a more consistent approach to that as we work with staff. And then mailouts and other things. One of the things that happened as a part of this project was a comparative scan across other regional districts in terms of what is their complement of communications and engagement staff, and how do they approach it versus like I said, decentralized approach like what we do, where we have 2 people and we rely a lot on other staff to provide us with content, and we work with them to define and refine what they're going to be putting out to the public. So when we looked at the Capital Regional District, obviously massive organization, really, really large community, they very much centralized the approach to communications and engagement there with a team of 17 people. And we called it a hybrid model where they still do rely on staff to provide information to the communications and engagement department, but there is 17 different people who are all specialized within that role, spread either across the departments or housed centrally within a communications and engagement division. The CRD is obviously a very large organization, so take it for what you will, but when we look at the Comox Valley Regional District, which is much more comparable to how we are in terms of the size of their community, the amount of residents they connect with, they have taken very much a centralized approach to their communications with a staff of 5 who deal directly with communications and engagement. It's spread across 2 different departments. They have an external communications division. They also have I'm at a loss for what the other one is called, but essentially they have 5 people who deal with this directly in their organization. So it's a different way of looking at things. So they've taken the responsibility within that division to do the majority of the work versus asking staff to provide a lot of input on what goes out to the public. When we look at the regional district in Nanaimo, very similar to us, they do it a little bit differently where they have 2 different specialist roles. One is specifically to public engagement, the other is dealing with corporate communications, but they also do have a couple of managerial roles that oversee that work as well. And then looking at, again, Alberni Qualiquot, they, as a newer, they just introduced this role recently in terms of a specialist that looks after this work. So there's 1 person there. But again, the population size, I think, is comparative to what they actually do. So more importantly, what did we hear when our consultant talked with staff? So I think overall we heard that we're doing a pretty good job in terms of what we provide. We've introduced some new models and tools for staff to use that have been going quite well. And some of the things that have happened have been almost since we started this process in late 2022. But what more important areas of improvement, what we heard was that the model that we're using right now is not, from staff's perspective, the best way to approach communications. And what they would like to see is a more centralized approach with more support and capacity to do the job that we do within our division, versus having a lot of, and like we see here, some staff have said that they spent 75% of their time just on communications type work within their role, which is not ideal. And I think in talking with management across the organization, in addition to staff, I think that's well recognized that we can be doing more, and they can be doing more in terms of focusing on their service delivery if they are not tasked with some of the things that are currently within their scope of work as we prescribe it right now. Again, key findings, we really recognize that there was so much great input from staff. I really, really want to say that I appreciate the time that staff took to participate in this process. There was a lot of great feedback that helped us to already refine and define some of the processes and roles that we do, and to come before you to present a couple of recommendations. There's, again, and this will probably never, this will always probably be a thing of a regional district where when there's a major project, we're always going to be reliant on external support to support the projects that happen, whether it's, usually if we engage a consultant, they're probably going to have a communications and engagement component within the work that they do. Oftentimes it probably doesn't make sense to have a consultant do work on a major project and then subcontract out. Then maybe they do that, but usually it's part of a complete package, and we'll probably never get away from doing that. But what we have been able to do is to work better as a team with those consultants that are hired to lead a major project or initiative across the organization. And through the processes we currently have in place and the ones that we're working on is to give them better access to our tools and to work better with them. And I think that we can continue doing that. But again, it's probably something that we're always going to be reliant upon as an organization, just given the different nature of the services we provide. What we heard was that growing capacity and centralizing communications essentially was the number one takeaway from this. And I don't want to belabor that point, but I think what we very clearly heard from staff and what we, hopefully already realized was that we would like to grow this team in terms of being able to do more of the work within our group and not task staff with doing as much as what they're currently doing. So that really kind of completes the high level review from what we had Urban Systems do as far as our communications processes goes. We've already had an opportunity to complete some process mapping and things as this was going on that have already bared fruit within the organization in terms of the way we go about doing news releases or social media and other things that I'm happy to share at a later point. But I will take questions on that, but I would like, there's two separate reviews that we've done. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to go into the second one and then can take overall questions. Is that?
Well, at this point, I can't see my full screen and if there's any other hands up. So I think I'll grant you that latitude to go into number two. And if directors want to hold your questions till the end, you might want to separate them into the two different categories because they are two very distinct items. And Mr. Schumacher, go ahead and proceed with your second part.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very it's weird to not have you sitting here in the room and hear your voice like that, but I will continue. Thank you for that. So the other review that we did, which may be more pertinent to the board, is a website audit where we realized that the current website that we have has a bunch of deficiencies, and as far as how residents access it. And we know from our previous community consultation that it is the number one way that people access information from the CVRD. And so we really wanted to make sure that the way we were presenting the information is matching the way people want to receive that information, but also that we know staff, again, from a decentralized model of communication, we have many staff that are responsible for updating the website on the back end. And we know that that is not working as well as it possibly could through the content management system we currently employ. So we know, I say pain points is, I guess, a colloquial term in terms of like what we know as problems. So these are some of the things that our consultant Up and Up have looked at to define where we are really falling short in terms of our website. So Civic Plus is the provider of our website, and when it was initially conceived, it was top of the line. But what's happened over the years is that we are no longer using the most current version of what they provide, but also that it's not an open source content management system, in that it's very proprietary in terms of how they offer the ability to update the site and to do many, many things within it. And so we're not really living up to what it could be, even if we continue to use them. But going to an open source content management system will allow us to have much greater flexibility in terms of how we publish information, how staff accesses the back end, how the public can interface with it. So that's number one recommendation. Number two is that we are not currently located within Canada as far as using Civic Plus. It works, I think, really well for a lot of American municipalities that utilize it, and that's where it grew from. But for a regional district in Canada, it's just not providing that localized service. And there's questions about, data sovereignty, as you see here, that are unanswered. If we do go with an open source, system, we can improve a whole bunch of features about the website, whether it's price, speed of which people can access the information, and search engine optimization. That is a huge part of how we need to improve how people access information, where, imagine you're sitting there trying to access, your garbage collection schedule through, Googling it, which is how most people do it, right? These days, I think, 10 years ago, there was probably multiple search engine options, but today, people are Googling. And to be able to see what it is without actually even accessing our website, I think is a feature that we are missing out on. So today, when you Google that, you'll be directed to a page on our website, but in the future, ideally, when somebody wants to find that information out, they will see it actually displayed through the Google search versus even having to click to come to our website. That is the gold standard, I guess, and the best practice these days. Another really important feature of our website and how people want to access information is by being able to subscribe to receive information directly from the CVRD. So when we publish information to our website, we want people who care about those topics, whether it's garbage collection, utilities, just general news from the CVRD. We want people to be able to toggle what they want to receive and have it sent directly to their email. That has been a key function of the current website, but in recent years, it's lagged in terms of, I guess initially it was fine when you were getting an email that said there's something new about utilities or something new about whatever thing you subscribe to, but you actually had to go there to find out what that was. What we would like to see happen, hopefully, going down the road, is an actual newsletter-ish type of feature where the information is delivered directly to people and is grouped based on what their objectives are or what they've selected as what they want to receive. So it can be customized, a centralized newsletter, but with each kind of category directly related to what their interests are. And so as we have it right now, it's very much, if you want to find out what we're doing, you get a notification that we're doing something different or something has changed, but it's not telling you that when you receive it and you have to go search it out. So that is something that we would love to see changed and to update within a new site, potentially. Some of the widgets that we have, I don't want to belabor you with technical information, but the widgets are very difficult to use. And when I say widgets, I mean the actual way that we display information on a page. So just to say that they're not functioning in a very easy to update way, whether it's for staff, again, who are tasked with doing this, or even for us, for Leah and I, when we need to try to be able to do this. The one thing I will say positively about Civic Plus is that the support has been fantastic. They have great people. They're available all the time to help us. But what it comes down to is that when we ask for support, there's a lot of times where we encounter this problem of, well, we don't really know how to do that. So again, using an old version of the site is not great. And then into navigation, we talked about some of the pain points, and one of the reasons why I think we need to go away from our existing site is that we organized the site initially, and again, before my time, but the way it's set up is by internal structure in terms of how we look at the service delivery to the residents. I don't think at the time when it was conceived to have a more resident focused approach to the website, in terms of how people access the information. So we have years and years of now data, and we now know how people really want to find information on our site. So it would be a great time to now go away from how we have it organized, talk about a new internal hierarchy of organization information, and restructure the website so that it makes more sense from the perspective of a resident who's looking for information. I'll just, in terms of best practices, we have menus where we've in the past tried to address some of the shortcomings of the site by adding in additional things where we've realized people want to see this, and so we've created a new menu item to allow people to do that. It's really a short-term solution to an overarching problem. We have problems where there's links to multiple pages. There's duplication of pages within our site that we know of on a massive scale almost. Again, because we have many staff that are contributing to the overall structure of it. One of the other problems that you probably noticed is that when we link people to pages on our site, we can't just create a customized URL. So, whether it's a news release or something else, there's always a number that comes before it, which we cannot get away from under the current structure. So it makes it very difficult to provide really easy to access URLs to provide to the residents to get to the information that they might want, whether that's through our social media or advertising or other ways. We did also look at microsites. So we have a number of distinct sites that have been created for a number of reasons over the years. And we had to just do a very high level look at those. So, the new normal site that we have is probably the most visited one of any of the other sites that we looked at or any of the microsites we have. And it, provides a distinct set of information for the organization or for the region as a whole. And one of those is, right now, which is especially prominent, is the idea of drought and water restrictions. And it does a great job in that, in providing that information. We have maps, and I think it was conceived out of an inability to provide that mapping feature through our current website, is I think why it was initially decided to do it through a microsite. And hopefully, if we move to an open source content management system, we can bring that back under the umbrella of the CVRD and not have it live out there on its own. Economic development, another great example, again, of an open source site that works really, really well. Could we potentially, again, bring that back within our fold? I think absolutely we could. And they looked at Plan Your Cowichan as well, which is our engagement site, which I think operates in a very distinct manner. It'd be great if we could do more direct public engagement through our website. However, it's almost best practice at this point to have a specific site and utilize Bang the Table or another feature to be able to do your public engagement because of the ease of accessing it, the tools that are available. You don't necessarily have to subscribe and become a registered user, as we just have seen with the hockey stick engagement that we conducted where we've allowed like anybody to be able to subscribe to it. But just to say that we have multiple sites that are out there aside from our corporate site. There's a bunch of recommendations in terms of how to use microsites going forward. Again, if depending on the approach that we take, we can continue to utilize them, and there are very good reasons for why we have used them. Whether it's, in the case of, the Weir, for example, where it's not a CVRD-led project, or we're partnered in it with other entities, and we want to make sure that the public understands that it's not a CVRD thing, and that we are, doing this across multiple entities, and make sure that that is understood at the outset. So by going directly to the CVRD website, it may give a false impression that this is a CVRD project. So I think the recommendations that have come out of the website is essentially that moving to an open source system, whether it's WordPress or Drupal, you see those two here. Those are just two of the more commonly used ones by any organization, whether it's local government or not. But that is really the main recommendation coming out of this review. Again, I can share this with the board and make this available, but there's a few recommendations they've made to the microsites that we have in terms of whether if we're going to keep them, how to improve upon them. And then I've taken a lot of your time already, so I'm just going to quickly run through this. There's a lot of recommendations in terms of the content on the site and how to best manage that. Again, if we're going to stay within our current content management system. So we do have some really good rules to follow if we're not going to take the next step to move away from what we currently have, which is great, which is good information for us to have. But I will just skip through that and just jump into, so where do we go from here? So now that we know what we know about our communications practices, our capacity, how do we improve upon that? So to start with, we have already started to complete some process maps and guides that have either been in work or have happened since we had this review completed, that we've shared with the organization to help staff do their job in terms of contributing to the communications and engagement work already. And then to address capacity, we will be presenting a supplemental request, which I think we've, again, heard wide and clear that we need more capacity within our division to be able to deliver the increasing expectations and need for doing communications and engagement as an organization. It will, not to get too far ahead, but just for your awareness, it will be very much a junior role, and actually a lot of admin support is what we are most lacking currently within communications and engagement. So it'll be very much like bottom end of the spectrum in terms of providing support to us to be able to do what we do better. And then this review, I think, contributes to the overarching need for a communications strategy to guide the organization, which has multiple facets to it. And again, not to say that we're talking communications versus public engagement. I think we have a really great strategy and overarching framework for the public engagement that we're currently doing that's been working really well for us. So this would be more to do with specifically corporate communications. When it comes to the website, again, we now know and have validated the extent of the issues within the current platform and the need to move to an open source content management system. So we're actively trying to define what the real cost of doing that is going to be, and recognizing that we're in a very challenging time as far as budgeting goes, and knowing that the 2024 budget is going to already be extremely limited in terms of what we can do. That being said, I think we know right now that it's going to be a multi-year process, and it can be very easily a multi-year process to break apart specific components of it. There's a lot And there's also the ability to probably pare it down. So, your basic content migration to a new open source system could be done with probably very minimal impact to the budget. But I think what we need and have defined is that we want to do a couple of things. One is a user experience process to understand how people are accessing it, whether that involves public engagement, staff engagement from the front end and the back end. I think that would be a great thing to add into it and is a really necessary component of this. The other is an information architecture look. So, once we understand how people actually access the website, then we can have a look at how we present the content and reorganize it in a way that makes most sense before we just do a copy and paste dump into a new system. So what I'm really hoping is that we will have a better sense before the budget begins in the fall to know what the true cost of doing this will be and present it essentially in packages in terms of what we can do in 2024 that's not going to break the bank essentially, and then, look at it in a multi-year approach to be able to get there. Sorry, my last slide should say questions, but there we go. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Chris. Could you lower your presentation so I can see the committee? Okay, so I've got Director Stone. Anyone else have? I can't see you yet, but I'll make a list when you can see
I saw
everyone.
Directors Manhas, McClinton, and Wilson. As your eyes in the room. But you said my name first, so I'm going to talk.
Go for it.
So, yeah, this is all great stuff. I don't want to cut off Director McClinton, but I was hoping to shorten the conversation because the presentation was really long. The only thing I might challenge is the necessity to, do studies of how users engage information. There's best practices that are well established both in the broader web community and in local government that we can glean from without spending more time and money and energy trying to study how people access the information. But other than that, all of this stuff is standard best practice stuff. I won't get into needing a consultant to tell us that. I'm pretty sure there's a web article we could have downloaded that could have presented to us, and we're well aware that our website is insufficient and our communications could use a little bit of more support and energy. The only other thing I would say is if a staff member is spending 75% of their time on communications, that should pay for the communications position without a supplementary request, especially if it was a number of staff who expressed that they were spending up to 75% of their time on communications activities. Essentially, sounds like we have a few communications staff already that haven't been tasked as so within the organization, and perhaps conversion of some roles would be a more efficient financial way to get those resources in the near term. But definitely supportive of all the directions that were laid out because they're necessary. And I think that it sounds complicated, but anybody who's in the industry knows that with a good firm doing that migration, they'll put you into that framework of best practices and sort of trees of information without having to spend more time, more importantly even perhaps than money, to get that work done. So thanks for the work. It's important work, and let's get on it.
Mr. Chair, if I might just respond quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
On to the next speaker. Through you to Director Stone, much appreciated, yes. So I think one of those things, like he mentioned, was the amount of staff time that is dedicated to doing this. And I think that's the key takeaway is we have staff that are doing this work, which in my mind, honestly, it's a great opportunity in some cases for staff to develop skills that are outside of their, professional technical role in terms of contributing to the communications goals of the organization. And that will continue, but if we can lessen the amount that they have to develop content and publish that content across our various channels, whether it's social media or the website, that's just going to contribute to them being able to dedicate their time to the core services that they've been tasked to deliver. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I was being glib, Mr. Chair. I support Chris's presentation and what he was saying. I was just being a bit of a smart aleck, so thank you.
I kind of picked up on that, and just for context, folks, I'm looking at once we finish this item, having a quick break and getting into the next item afterwards. And this has been a lot more in-depth presentation than I expected based on what I read in the staff report. So I think there's some expertise in the room there that will be helpful in this. So with that, I'll go to Director. I've got Directors Manhas, McClinton, Wilson, Segal, and myself. Anyone else wants to go on that list? Nicholson. Okay, Director Manhas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schumacher, for your presentation. I know local governments use way too many consultants for projects, and it just adds a cost. And just as I concur with what Director Stone said about consultants and studies and stuff. But you had also mentioned that many of the divisions are using consultants for their communications. Can you tell us how many of the divisions here? And also, I know you probably won't have this answer, what the cost has been for using consultants for these communications. You can have them maybe during the budget process or whatever. You can get us those numbers. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. Through the chair to Director Manhas's question. Yeah, that's a really great question. I have been looking to try to understand what that cost might be to the organization since I've joined. It's a difficult task because a lot of times we have these major projects that happen and it makes sense to couple in facilitation support in terms of the communications and engagement component of the project when you're dealing with them versus either, again, we're kind of short staffed, I guess I would say, and our capacity is limited in terms of being able to support some of these major works in-house. But I've always been curious to know what that overall cost is when you couple out and determine what that spend is as part of the overall project. Selfishly, I guess, to say how does it make sense to add more capacity in-house to do that and take that out of those? So I don't have a true cost to give you at this point. I do think that it would be very justifiable without knowing it even right now to say we absolutely, if we add an FTE to our department and our division to be able to do more of that work in-house, that it will absolutely justify the overall cost that we're spending right now in terms of what we do in the addition of those projects.
Just a follow-up comment, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally concur with you, Mr. Schumacher, because the price the consultants charge is outrageous. So, thanks.
So just a quick comment and looking towards staff, and I can't see any of them on screen, but I think that it's Director Manhas has raised a perfectly legitimate question. And for the electoral area directors that attended the Ideas Fairs, clearly that was something I think probably beyond the scope of what our communications would do, and it was money well spent in that. They were very well done. But given the nature of the request, is there any possibility that finance would be able to, and the various divisions, at least be able to give us a Class D estimate of what we think we might be spending on external consultants on the various different departments? And I'm posing that to our CAO or General Manager of Corporate Services or the likes. Or Ms. Bolin.
Through the chair to Director Morrison. So that would take a little bit because consultants and that are all lumped in as one, so it wouldn't be able to say exactly who is the communications part of it because consultants is just one GL. We can break it down by what departments, but it would be a much bigger project to figure out what companies are being paid for what type of consulting that they're doing for the CVRD. And
Thank you.
And there's limited staff in finance right now to be able to do that.
I know I was posing a difficult question. I'll go to Director McClinton.
Sorry, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to
Yep.
follow up on that. What we do have, and I should to bring this to the board's attention, is that we have developed a couple of vendor lists for communications and engagement work. So one of those is specific to graphic design and digital design, essentially, that because we recognize that we rely on external consultants to do some of this stuff, it makes sense for us to have a short list of vendors that we can rely upon to have a consistent approach to the way that we do the work, and to make it easier for staff when they do need that support to not have to do a full RFP, RFQ process, and to just get it done. And to understand what the pricing is going to be as a part of that as well. So those are very well defined. So we have one just to do support if we have a document that needs to be presented in a public format that needs to look nice. We have a list of vendors for that. We also have an overarching, like a much bigger, I shouldn't say bigger list, it's a short list, but for work that is specific to communications and engagement. And so those agencies have, again, been pre-selected to be able to provide those services. So we're really not looking at a huge, number of people that provide those services. We've tried to define them in terms of understanding the cost, understanding their specialty, where they have done work in the past, ideally for local governments, again, so that we can make it most efficient when we're doing, and maybe, and again, this is specific to smaller scale projects. And I will just reaffirm that when we do large scale consultants to help us with whatever project it might be, a lot of times they have a baked in communications and engagement facilitation component. And in some cases, it makes a lot of sense to go that route versus utilizing our short list of pre-approved vendors.
Thank you, Mr. Schumacher. I think I'm just on piggybacking on what Director Manhas has said. I think what I'm looking for, and it's difficult to read the room from here, but is there's a number. It's baked into a lot of the work that we're doing, and it's probably a little larger than that list of qualified vendors and the likes that you're talking about. And so when it comes time to make decisions at budget time, it would be helpful as a director to be able to understand what the scope and the quantity of external consulting dollars are being spent, so that when we have supplemental items coming forward from your division, that we have a clear understanding of the full dollars that are being spent. But with that, this one report is getting a little long in discussion. I want to go to Director McClinton next.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation, Mr. Schumacher. It was great. I commend you on the work you do. Everybody hates their web developer, so it's a thankless job. Clients think the internet is magic and you're supposed to be a magician, so it's not easy. Just a couple questions, and then but I do just want to agree with Mayor Stone. What was the point that I think keeping a group smaller, and I mean, these best practices are out there. Creating an intuitive website isn't an intuitive process, and I think we'd be well served to kind of move through that. We've got some world-class web developers right here in Victoria specifically. We do, I know lots of companies do tons of work in the States and rarely see it going the other way. Partly because everything's 30% off in Canada, but we do have some great developers here, and I think you could find the support you need there. And it's a race to the start line. Like you want to get your site to a place that's manageable. You get your analytics installed, and then you start iterating from there. And I totally agree, open source is the way to go. So just two quick questions. I mean, what would happen if Civic Plus went away? What if they, ceased to do business anymore? What's kind of your plan B?
Through the chair to Director McClinton. Wow, I don't think we have an emergency scenario planned out. If that were to happen, I guess we kind of feel like they're large enough that that's not necessarily a major risk at this point, but it's absolutely something that we should be considering. And I think that relying upon any company. And from what we kind of now know just by doing the initial work that we've looked at, as far as when you use a proprietary provider, they don't necessarily want to provide you with a great way to migrate your content out of their site. So we're already kind of, it's a bit of a, come to Jesus kind of moment where you start to realize when you're beholden to an organization to that extent that, you have to start to really think about those things, like how much is that going to cost? Is there a way to do it? And start to dig deeper. It always, I think in any case, it really starts to open doors that you don't necessarily want to open, but are necessary to happen in order to figure out how to move forward. So yes, I think that's a really great point, and one of the reasons why we should be very much exploring this migration to an open source content management system.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we live in an information age, and it's critical infrastructure. It's not just a nice to have by any stretch. It's in the fiber of our society. So just the last question, do you have, like for instance, Google Analytics set up or any way to sort of understand at the data level, like how much pages are being used, their conversion rates? Do you have that kind of information?
So we do. What happened, again, another deficiency of Civic Plus is that they moved away from they basically outsourced analytics or stopped providing their own analytics 6 to 8 months ago, and basically told anybody who subscribed or was using them that you have to kind of move to Google Analytics if you want to have that level of information. I think as an organization, we have a really, even just looking back at the last 5 years, I think we understand what our top visited pages are. We have a really great sense of how people access our website, whether it's through Google or Facebook or however they're coming into it. And I don't think, and it hasn't really changed year over year. Like it's been. Again, I think our demographics probably have something to do with that in terms of people just always kind of doing the same thing, which is great. And so I'm very happy to be able to work in a place where we just can be so predictable in that way. That being said, another thing that will be enhanced by moving away from that is establishing Google Analytics like directly into a new site so that we can capture that and report on that if necessary to the board, to senior management, depending on the appetite. I appreciate, though, again, like just coming before you, like I take a lot of time to explain these things and talk about it, and I respect the time of the board, and I don't know if how much detail you really want as far as that goes and how people are doing that, like accessing our website, for example, but happy to, serve the board and provide that level of detail if required.
Yeah, and just final comment, the point about following Google's best practices, like those, it's all outlined, they provide that information. I think that's absolutely the way to go, making it easy to get to. I know in 2018, the 6th most Googled word was the word Google. That's literally how people find Google. So it's the way, yeah. So I think great presentation. Yeah, you certainly have my support.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris. The problem with the communications is whatever you do, it will never be enough. I know that for a fact. Now, in order to practice what I preach, I'll keep this short and sweet because I thought this was going to be a short and sweet meeting, but it's obviously not. So the website navigation, it's always been a problem with the CVID website. I've got a term that I could use, I won't because it'll offend somebody, but it is a real problem. It has to be sorted out. And at the moment, I'm seeing 3 mayors and 1 deputy mayor, each of whom have their own communications department. Everybody's doing things, 2 mayors and 1 deputy, which may have. But is there any chance that we could perhaps start some cooperation and less compartmentalization on some of the stuff that's going on here? Just a general one. I'm finished, thank you.
Trade secrets, sorry, no.
Do you need to answer that, Director or Mr. Schumacher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Wilson. Yeah, we collaborate a lot, and you're actually were graced with the presence of somebody from the city of Duncan originally on a short term who contributed to the overall communications objectives of that organization. And I think could affirm that we do have regular conversations and meetings just to make sure that we are providing a regional type of approach to our communications. So that absolutely exists, and I very much appreciate the collaboration that we do have. As far as, I guess I'm probably not answering your question, but I think when it comes to...
It was more of a rhetorical question,
Okay,
actually, but
okay.
thanks very much, Chris.
And I appreciate Director Wilson's narrowing of focus as opposed to broadening of focus, and maybe we'll get out of here at a reasonable time. I'll go to Director Segal. I've got myself and Director Nicholson. Does anyone else want on the list?
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Schumacher. Great presentation. I agree. We greatly need to support an expansion with external communications. The majority of conversations I have with residents is just like, I didn't know this was happening. And so I think we need like digital marketing. But we can't ask people how they're engaging. I think most people aren't necessarily looking, but they do want to know if it's happening. And so, like, how do we drive up the registrations on that Plan Your Couch and website, like get our mailing lists bigger, drive that engagement. We need to show them what's happening and use us. I saw that list of all the social media platforms that you have. I think that would have been great when I first came into office to get that list. I just found the My CVRD Instagram, because that doesn't actually come up when you just search CVRD. And because we are each individually connected with our communities, and I think there can be lots of great work together that we can do there to support. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I may respond.
You may.
Keep it longer than it needs to be. I see some grunting from... but just to say, yes, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Director Segal. We do have a very fulsome suite of social media and other avenues, and I obviously encourage directors to channel the news that comes out from us through your own channels. This is very much off topic of the report, but would love to come back before you in the near future to talk more specifically about social media. And the guide that we have and the approach that we take, the channels that we have, and make sure that everybody is fully apprised of those and is either following them and can link into them to share information, because again, besides our website, it's probably the second most valuable tool that we have in our toolkit to get information out to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Schumacher and Director Segal. I'm just going to make a quick point, and I think Director Segal has tapped into this. When I read the report, and of course we didn't have the presentation as part of it, the thing that struck me was we are not only users of this information, but we are also distributors of this information. And clearly by the interest of the committee today, there's a very keen interest, more among some than others, to be participants in this process. And so I'm going to strongly recommend that we have an opportunity to learn a little bit more and to participate in this process, because if we're not doing the communicating, we have to have the confidence to be able to direct our residents to a portal where they can access that information. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out. Obviously, some in this room have more skills than others and more knowledge than others, and I think they're a great resource, and I think they should be used. And I'm going to say that for those of you that didn't know, that at one point, and I think Mr. Schumacher had mentioned this, we actually had a top-notch website that it was 3 clicks and you could get to anything. Not so much today, but we can get back to that place, I think. I'll go to Director Nicholson to close.
Oh, thank you very much. So this has been a really super interesting conversation and presentation. And so Mr. Schumacher talked about what staff have done to look at their communication processes in the organization. And then he talked about the website in particular. I would like to get away from I don't know much about social media, and I would really appreciate a workshop on how to do it. And I can't agree more than with Director Segal that you need to use directors, because communications is inherently a really messy thing, and everyone communicates differently and gets their information in different ways. And so you have to, my approach is do it all as many different ways as you can think, and someone will pick up on it. But what I really want to talk about, my comments really I want to make are about, I agree that we need, your short-term things are super important. To be strategic, to be efficient and effective with communications, you need to have that coordination thing happening and the support there. But essentially, in a service organization, I believe everyone's job is to communicate. And it doesn't bother me that there's a lot of communication work happening. It probably can be done much more efficiently and effectively in the organization if they have more support. But essentially, we're a service organization, and everyone should view their jobs as being communicators. And it's so important to me that we put a face on the organization, and the face we put on the organization should be friendly and helpful. And, that's what we should be all about. So, and I also think that we're seeing more and more emergency situations, and I anticipate that we're going to be dealing with some horrendous stuff in the future. So we really need to get our act together on communications as an organization. So let me see if I have any other points I wanted to say. No, that's probably it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Mr. Schumacher, do you want to make a concluding remark?
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, thank you very much for the comments. You touched on a couple of points, and again, I know this has taken far longer than you anticipated. I don't come before the committee or the board very often, so I will languish in my time here and drag it on as long as I possibly can to get as much information to you as possible. But it's really let me start by saying we have a training session scheduled for October for the EA directors, something that the North Cowichan directors recently received, which is like a communications kind of half-day. Director Justice and Douglas, I think it's going to be something that the EA directors will benefit greatly from. Unfortunately, timing and everything hasn't permitted us to do it in the spring or summer, and so it's going to happen in October. But there's a lot that we can do as an organization to better equip our staff and you as directors to get that information out. I recognize absolutely that it's essential that the directors that sit on this board and this committee are able to access the information and to distribute it through the channels that you have, because they're very, very important. On the social media side, again, it's tricky when we have all these channels at our disposal that we can push information out through, but there exists many distinct groups within, let's even just say Facebook. Each of your communities, as I'm sure you know, have their own groups and probably multiple, whether it's Shawnigan, Cobble Hill, North Cowichan. I don't even know how many that exist out there, or even within Duncan, but the information that we put out can be shared within those groups for better or for worse. Unfortunately, like in some ways it's great to get the information out, and other times it doesn't allow us to be managing the conversation and to reply to misinformation that may be happening out there. So it's this catch-22 double-edged sword. We can do the best that we can, but at the same time, the conversations are going to be happening out there, and managing that is something entirely outside of the wheelhouse of what we do as the core service to the organization. But would love to make you ambassadors and empower you to be able to go into those groups and to be the voice of the organization and to correct that. So absolutely Absolutely. I think what I'm hearing is that is probably the most valuable next step in terms of engaging with the directors as far as social media goes, and prior to the communications workshop that we have planned for the fall.
And I'm going to go to Director Nicholson for a concluding follow-up. So, I got Director Staples as well. I was going to try and keep Mr. Schumacher's report to under an hour, but it doesn't look like we're going to get there. Director Nicholson, can you do your follow-up, and I'll go to Director Staples to conclude.
Thank you. I did have an idea. The other thing that I reflected on when Mr. Schumacher gave his presentation was that it was very sort of inward facing, and I wondered if maybe a communications commission where we had sort of an ongoing group of community residents providing feedback on how we're doing it might be helpful. Yeah, that was just an idea I had.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. Do you want to respond to that? I think that's something. Go ahead.
It's just something for people to think about. We can follow up later.
Okay, thank you.
Time on it now.
No time wasted here whatsoever. Director Staples.
Just to follow up to my response when you were saying about us going online, one of the things that's really helpful is to have, and think about this in that overall communications policy, is to have, when you know that there's something, or when we let you know there's something online, is for you to provide us with statements so that we're all giving the same and correct information. I think so yes, we can do that, but we need to have the same information. Otherwise, it's way too easy for there to be more confusion caused. So I think that's part of what needs to be built in as well, is making sure that we get the information that we need to disseminate. Thank you.
Mr. Schumacher?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to I guess respond to both of those, I like the idea of a communications commission or working group or something that involves residents to help provide us with tips and, best to enable us to commit to the community in the way that we need to. So if there's a willingness to do that and we're directed to do that in the future by the committee or by the board, then I would be very welcome to hearing what that might look like and developing something going forward. To Director Staples' comments, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we do try our best when we know there is an emerging issue or an ongoing issue out there in the community to develop key messages. I think what we're challenged with at the regional level sometimes is just whose issue is it at the end of the day, and whether when it comes to a regional service delivery like the CVRD provides, then absolutely it's us. And sometimes when it's on a more localized level, again, we have a great group of communicators working for the municipalities and us to troubleshoot with, like we do with water restrictions, for example, in terms of how to get that information out, when's the best time to announce things, should we advertise, should we do this? So those are things that we constantly talk about, but absolutely, I hear your concerns.
Thank you for that, Mr. Schumacher. Director Staples, your hand is still up. Do you have further remarks? Her head has gone down. So with that, this has been a very interesting hour of presentation and discourse amongst the board. I think you realize now that you've got some very keen interest and willingness to participate in further processes as we go down the line. This is an information item, as I understand. Is there a next step that we need to consider right now before I call for a break? Mr. Schumacher, anything further?
Mr. Chair, no, not at this time. As I kind of said at the end of the presentation, there'll be a couple supplemental requests that will be developed or are developed and will be coming before the board for consideration as part of the 2024 budget. Just to reiterate, I think we heard loud and clear that capacity within the communications and engagement division is not where it could be. And again, so that will be one of them. The other one, and whether it ends up being a supplemental item or there's opportunity to utilize some other funding as far as infrastructure goes, but the website is certainly a key consideration for the organization. And I think just to go back to what Director McClinton said, you know, I think we need to look at the website as infrastructure and not just a digital tool, because really it's the core of what we do in terms of providing information to our residents, and should be considered in the same way as a recreation center or any of the other things that we own and operate as far as maintenance and redevelopment. So I would just say nothing to consider at this moment, but I'll be back before you in the near future. Hopefully I won't take as much of your time as I have today, but I appreciate your attention and consideration to what's been presented. So thank you.
That's a novel approach. I wonder if the federal government would consider the state of affairs of local government websites as an infrastructure deficit. So good one. Director Stone, you had your hand up. I'm hoping you can wrap this up for us so we can have a break.
I didn't have anything to say on this item. I just wondered if we really needed a break when we just have the one item remaining. That's all.
That's entirely possible, but I could read the room from here, and there were people getting antsy. So I think
I thought the room was saying, let's finish this meeting, but.
Okay, so let's quick hand. Who wants a break? Director Segal's left the room. Actually, I was talking to Amanda, and before we get started, can I have, because this is a new item, can I have some explanation as to why this isn't at electoral area services and instead? It seems like a fully EA item.
Thank you, Chair. We are live.
Hi, can you hear me now? Yes, no? Can anyone hear me? Okay, great. We're live. I have a question before we get started on the next item. Why is this before Committee of the Whole and not Electoral Area Services?
Mr. Chair, I could happily answer that for you.
Please do.
Two parts. One is that there's some time sensitivity to getting this to today's board, and that we're in final stages of contract negotiation and would like to finalize our contract so that we can begin implementation soon. Also, as a financial matter, would be voted on by all members of the board, might be helpful for the municipal directors to participate in the conversation.
I understand that, and thank you for that. And that I gather that we then will need to add a number 5 that this be forwarded to the board for today's consideration then.
It is at the top of the recommendation.
Okay, I don't have number 1. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's proceed. Everybody's on. We'll go to Ms. Boyd. Would you introduce this, please?
Thank you, Chair. We are at R3, report from the General Manager, Land Use Department regarding the land management system budget.
Ms. Gerolf.
Good morning. Still morning. Thank you very much. So I'm here before you today to request commitment of operating reserves to fund the land management system, which will support the activities of the development services, building inspection, bylaw enforcement, and animal control services provided by the regional district to electoral areas. So this follows a couple of key points, and I will be succinct, as I promised the chair. There was a commitment in 2020 of $370,000 towards implementation of land management from the community planning function. In 2021, we actually sought funding from the province of BC through UBCM to forward a more comprehensive land management system. We were successful in that in receiving $500,000 in grant funding towards this much sort of more fulsome system to support all of the divisions that I noted. And we've been working through the process of developing the framework for that system, developing the request for proposals. And that request for proposals went out earlier this year. And as I noted, we are now in the final stages of contract negotiation, but need to ensure that we have sufficient funds committed so that we can enter into that contract. And so before you are recommendations to move operating reserves out of building inspection, community planning, and bylaw enforcement. The numbers are noted there on page 1 of the report. I will note that the amount that we're requesting to move from function 325 is significantly less than what was previously approved by the board. And that is because the grant is funding the balance of that portion for function 325 community planning. And I will also note that there isn't currently a request to move operating reserves out of the animal control function because we actually don't have sufficient funds to pay for the module. We have about, I think it's approximately $64,000 in the reserve for that function. The module is $72,000. So we'd be coming back through the budget process to commit to figure out a way to pay for that module through the regular budget process. But the resolution or the recommendation here is that the 2024 budget for function 310 include that so that we have a commitment to go forward with that particular module. I think I'll leave it at that and take any questions if there are any.
So kind of housekeeping, but not, but thank you for that. And thank you for your succinctness. Go to committee for any questions. Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Charles, what will the public see from these expenditures? Will dogs be better tagged, or like is there anything, or is it all backroom?
So, well, there should be significant improvements to both internal business processes and external processes which involve the public. So internally, we have a better way of managing our information. We've been talking a lot about information management. We're dealing with massive volumes of information in very crude and rudimentary ways right now. And so we're trying to do that more efficiently. It will also allow us to not work in silos, but to coordinate the information that we have. So if you can imagine our geographic information system, which is essentially the map of the CVRD, all of the properties that exist within the CVRD will be integrated into the system. And so for every property, we'll be able to see at a glance any files, any land use files that are associated with it, whether they're building permit files or development permit files or bylaw enforcement issues. Everything will be available at a glance, which makes it much easier to get a complete picture of what's going on in a particular property from a staff perspective. And much quicker than what we have today. And then from a public perspective, we can control the amount and types of information that we can push out to the public via our either web map or through another type of search engine, which would allow people to find out, for instance, information about their own property or information about properties within their neighborhood, for instance, so active applications. And then another kind of key output that we anticipate is being able to provide you with really good information, detailed information reports about status of applications and files, and bylaw enforcement files as well.
Thank you. Most encouraged by the breaking down of silos, too.
Yeah.
Director Stone. Director Stone?
Oh, thanks. Just a question on the dog licensing module. Since the Muni offices also sell regional district dog licenses, will they have access to that module so that it's integrated, or will they just kind of forward the licenses they sell onto CVRD staff to be tracked?
I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not entirely sure.
Ms. Boyd. Oh, yes. Resolution.
Thank you. That'd be recommended to the board on July 12th, 2023, that the operating reserves for Function 320, Building Inspection, Function 325, Community Planning, and Function 328 bylaw enforcement be prioritized for the land management systems implementation in 2023 and 2024, and that the 2023 budget be amended by A, increasing function 320 transfer from operating reserves by $267,574.51, and increasing function 320 consultants by $267,574.51, and B, increasing function 325 transfer from operating reserves by $155,024.51, and increasing function 325 consultants by $155,024.51, and C, increasing function 328 transfer from operating reserves by $219,051, and increasing function 328 consultants by $219,051.51. And 3, that the 2024 budget for function 310 includes $72,000 for the land management system dog licensing module, and 4, that the previous resolution to commit $370,000 from function 325 operating reserve 2020 supplemental be rescinded.
Moved
Moved
and
by-
seconded?
Yep. Second?
Moved by Director Abbott, seconded by Director Stone. So it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We are 9 unfinished business, nothing, and new business, nothing, but we move to number 11, question period. We have a total of 15 minutes. We have one question, and persons are permitted to do one question and one follow-up question regarding agenda items, and if there's time left over, it's questions regarding CVRD functions. Thank you. Is there anyone from the gallery? Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and fellow directors. I really enjoyed David Slade's presentation today, but I'm also concerned with the environmental impacts that we're seeing and highway closures that we need to consider the viability of rail still. You might have heard recently that the CRD is exploring an electric train. And they are great people movers, and it's not something that we really think of in our area, but I think the goal is to get more vehicles off the road, because building infrastructure for highways is much more expensive. So, Mr. Chair, my question to you is, will the CVRD keep an open mind and explore all avenues of transportation?
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. A great question, and just a curious note is it's right in our legislation and our oaths and all the work we do that we as elected officials are to keep an open mind, not an empty one, but an open one. We will have to rely on our staff, who will be initiating some of the consultations that the provincial money has given us, and it's about the partnership. It's about the people up and down the line and the communities and what's going to be best in the long run. I think that it's been pretty clearly proven that movement of goods and people by rail is a very low CO2 emitting mode of transportation. All of these things will be considered seriously and considered by the directors sitting around this table.
Thank you. And if I may have a follow-up question?
Please go ahead.
On a different item, on the communications part, I, as a user of your communications system and one who tries to further public engagement by referring people to your website, I do know the challenges firsthand and have formed a good relationship with Mr. Schumacher over the years. And I wonder if I could share with you an example of when the CVRD and some of your partner agencies in the public work together?
Ms. Kaufman, it's supposed to be question period,
Yep.
not input period, so I'd be more than willing to take that information offline and share it with staff. And so if you could maybe restrict your questions to questions.
Okay, my question then is, the presentation today was very much focused on internal communications and how it works with staff and the directors. And I would like to see if the board would consider going externally to the public, because I think the public are the end users as well, and we have a valuable voice to give to the process.
Ms. Kaufman, I think that's a great question. I had contacted staff in advance of the meeting, and the fact that it was a very, I won't call it an internal navel gazing, but it certainly was an internal facing document. I think that you saw a keen interest amongst the directors around the table today to have a participatory role as in the next steps, and I think we all acknowledge that the end user should at least have some input and a voice in ultimately the avenue and the portal that they communicate with us. So agreed, it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you for that, and I'll just make one final comment.
Go ahead.
It's actually a good suggestion I would have to give to you, and it's unfortunate that I couldn't share it. It was kudos to your staff.
And we do have great staff, and I appreciate that. And we're trying to make sure that our public input and our question periods are along the lines of the policies that are there. And I'd love to hear your story offline. Any other individuals would like to provide or ask a question of the chair?
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, taking into consideration all the information you had on Rails to Trails today, would the CVRD consider postponing the, I believe, approved for rail with trail from the Wharf Park in Shawnigan Lake to the Mills, Old Mill Stream Park?
Tenuous link there, Mr. Evans, but I'll grant it to you, and I'll do my best to answer your question. At this point, you're before the committee of the whole, and that's an electoral area services committee question. And this was a pitch for exclusive use of the corridor for trail purposes. I would say at this point that's a good question to be posed to the electoral area services committee. That's one that I can't answer as the chair of the committee of the whole. I think that Mr. Slade's presentation was excellent. I think it brought information to the committee and to the directors, and I think there's many other factors that need to be considered. To say the least, the points that Ms. Kaufman brought up about the consultation and engaging of the people that those provincial dollars were meant for. I can't answer that question as to whether or not we would consider a postponement or a cancellation of a project that is clearly been given some endorsement by the Electoral Area Services Committee and the board at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question of the chair on today's agenda or other items? Thank you for that. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We are 9 unfinished business, nothing, and 10 new business, nothing, and we are past that. Oh, man, it's been a long meeting. Let's go. There's no closed session this time, and we can move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Well, just before we adjourn, I want to thank everyone for your tolerance of having me sitting in this room and not in that room during the meeting, and we got through it. That's kind of amazing, and we've had a motion to adjourn, so all in favor?